Most people think the oldest child had it easiest. They were responsible, they were mature, they seemed like they had everything under control. But what if that wasn't maturity at all? What if it was a child learning how to survive? A child who stopped asking for help, stopped making mistakes, stopped being a child because someone in the family had to hold everything together. And if you're the oldest child, there's a chance you've been carrying that weight for so long, you don't even realize it's still crushing you. Think about a little kid, maybe 7, maybe 8 years old, sitting at the dinner table while the adults argue. Everyone else is loud. Everyone else is falling apart. But this kid is watching, calculating, thinking, what do I need to do right now to make this okay? That child wasn't born wise, that child was made responsible. And the terrifying part is nobody noticed. Because from the outside, that child looks so mature, so capable, so impressive for their age. What nobody saw was the cost. There's a concept in psychology called parentification, but forget that word. Let's talk about what it actually feels like. It feels like being the emotional thermostat in your family. When things got cold, you warmed them. When things got too hot, you absorbed the heat. You became so finely tuned to everyone else's emotional temperature that you forgot to check your own. You became a caretaker before you had anyone to teach you how to care for yourself. And here's the part that cuts deepest: you weren't forced. Not in any obvious way. No one handed you a rule book, you just picked it up. Because you were observant, because you were sensitive, because you could see what needed to be done, and you couldn't stand watching it not get done. That's not a flaw. That's what happens when a perceptive child lives in an unpredictable home. You adapted, brilliantly actually. But adaptation has a price. Pause for just a moment here. Think about your childhood bedroom. Think about what you were doing at 10 years old on a Saturday afternoon. Were you playing? Were you lost in something joyful and meaningless and completely your own? Or were you listening for footsteps, checking moods, making yourself small or useful depending on what the room needed? A lot of oldest children, when they sit with that question honestly, realize something quiet and heartbreaking. They can't remember what they actually liked. They remember what they were good at. They remember what kept the peace. But what they liked just for themselves, for no reason, with no purpose that's harder to find. Here's what happens to a child who grows up too fast. They become incredibly good at reading people. They can walk into a room and feel the tension before a word is spoken. They notice the flicker of disappointment in someone's eyes before that person even knows it's there. They are, in many ways, emotionally gifted, but that gift came with a shadow, because they learned to read everyone else before they ever learned to read themselves. They built a whole identity around being needed, being reliable, being the one who doesn't fall apart. And so now, as adults, they find themselves in a very specific kind of loneliness. Not the loneliness of being alone, the loneliness of being surrounded by people who depend on you, while no one, not one single person, thinks to ask if you're okay. Because why would they? You always seem okay. You've always seemed okay. That's the mask you've been wearing since you were 7 years old, and you've worn it so long sometimes you forget it's there. Let's talk about what this looks like in real life. Because it's more specific than people think. You are the person who apologizes first, even when you weren't wrong. Not because you're weak, because you were trained to believe that keeping the peace is more valuable than being right. You are the person who downplays your own pain. Something genuinely hard happens to you, and your first instinct is to minimize it, to say, "I'm fine, it's not a big deal. Other people have it worse." You've been comparing your suffering to others since childhood. You always ranked yourself last. You are the person who has a visceral discomfort with being taken care of. Someone tries to do something kind for you, genuinely kind, no strings attached, and something in you gets nervous, suspicious almost. It feels strange, off balance. Because in your experience, love always came with a role to play. Care was never just given, it was exchanged. You gave stability, you gave emotional labor, you gave your childhood maturity, and in return you received a kind of conditional belonging. You were loved, but you were also needed, and somewhere along the way, you stopped being able to tell the difference. Here's the twist, and this one is quiet, but it will stay with you. You've probably spent a lot of your life being angry at yourself for not being more successful, more disciplined, more emotionally available, more everything. You hold yourself to a standard so impossibly high that no human being could reach it. But ask yourself this: where did that standard come from? It came from a child who decided somewhere around age 7 or 8 that if I am just good enough, responsible enough, invisible enough, then everything will be okay. You've been living by a 7-year-old's survival strategy. That strategy saved you then. It was brilliant, actually, in the way children find brilliant ways to survive. But you are not 7 anymore, and the house is not on fire anymore. And yet every morning you wake up braced, ready, scanning, already managing, already calculating, already asking yourself, what does everyone need from me today? The question you were never allowed to ask, the question that still feels almost selfish to speak out loud is, what do I need? Sit with that for a second. Not in a fixing way, not in a let me make a list way. Just sit with the fact that that question exists, that you have needs, that you had needs, that a small child a long time ago had needs that were quietly, gently, consistently placed second. You didn't need a perfect childhood. You just needed to be a child. To be irresponsible sometimes. To be confused and messy and completely unuseful. To cry without anyone needing you to be okay 5 minutes later. To be held without having to hold everyone else in return. You deserved that. That child deserved that. This is the part where most people expect the list. The 5 steps to heal, the habits to break, the affirmations to repeat. But that's not what you need to hear right now. Right now, what you need to hear is this. The way you turned out thoughtful, perceptive, emotionally deep, quietly strong, that didn't happen by accident. It happened because you paid a price, a real price. And for a long time, nobody acknowledged that. Maybe nobody ever has. So let this be that moment. You paid a price. It mattered. What you carried was real and heavy, and you carried it alone. Far longer than you should have. And somewhere inside you, beneath the competence and the calm and the carefully managed exterior, there is still that child. Waiting. Not for a solution, not for a plan, just for someone to notice. Just for someone to say, I see how hard you've been working. You can rest now. You can rest now. Not because everything is fixed, not because everyone is okay, but because you are allowed to exist beyond your usefulness. You are allowed to be a person, not just a function. The oldest child never felt like a child, but it's not too late to give yourself the one thing you never got permission. Permission to be uncertain, to be soft, to need things, to not have the answer. Permission to finally just be human.